Welcome into another edition of New Track Record Podcast, recording from the WELT studios. Caleb Hatch, Justin Kinney with you. Hello, Justin.
Hello, Caleb. How are you?
Doing well. Might have a summer cold coming on.
Which is just the worst. I mean,
right?
it's always terrible to be sick at any time, but
the
summer, man,
is the worst time.
We just got out of a long stretch of like 90-degree weather. You just don't associate a cold with summer in mid-90s, but hopefully it doesn't you don't get a full-on cold. Hopefully the immune system and fight it off.
Sore throat. We'll see. I'm fearful it will get worse.
That's how it starts.
That is always how it starts for me. So we'll see come next week at this time if I have
a voice
hacking or hacking.
Sounding like some sort of very sickly fellow.
Yes.
I mean, Ed Orgeron voice.
Which you can do when you're ill. So
I can. We have documented evidence of that. So
yes. All right. Well, IndyCar talk. That's what we're here for. In the Firestone Grand Prix, Monterey at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, it was Alex Palou winning the pole, Alex Palou winning the race. Anything but as simple as that sounded, though, on Sunday, as he worked the strategy, didn't pit when a lot of the other top guys like Rossi and Herta and Kirkwood did. And then, of course, cautions breed cautions. That's what they always say, right? And that's what happened. And the strategy worked out for Palou as Colton Herta had to fuel save down the end of the stretch and could not.
Seemingly as always.
Yeah, could not compete for the win. But this was an entertaining race. And for Alex Palou, this is big for him in the championship. He moves back to the points lead. And with Mid-Ohio coming up, another opportunity, another track he can be pretty good at. Now, the hybrids are the obvious kind of wrench and everything, but that impacts everyone, so we'll see if that really changes up the championship. But for Palou, a big win on Sunday. He's got a 23-point lead over Will Power, 32 over Scott Dixon. Those are really your serious contenders at the moment. Yes, Herta is in fourth, and Kirkwood is in fifth. Potter of the Ward a couple points back in sixth. But those are your three championship contenders, and I think those are the drivers it will come down to. Once again, Penske and Ganassi.
Yeah, Penske and Ganassi it has been since 2012 when Ryan Hunter-Reay won the championship. Alex Palou, just a great weekend. You picked him going into the weekend because he's been so good at Laguna Seca, and then he gets on pole, and then you say, well, it's a guarantee he's going to win this. I even said to you, I'd pick Alex Palou as more of a guarantee to win at Laguna Seca than Max Verstappen at, where were they? Spain?
Yeah.
At Barcelona. Turns out both of them won, but that's how sure we were with Alex Palou winning this. It was a little bit more entertaining than we thought it would be at the front, but in the end, Alex Palou gets it. It's a 3-horse race for this championship. You and I are in agreement that, is it a 1-horse race? I mean, I know there's 6 oval races left, and people will say Alex Palou's never won on an oval, but it's not like he's trash on ovals.
I mean, he was second in the Indy 500 in just his second start there.
Yeah, I mean, he finished he finished on the podium at Texas last year. He finished on the podium at Iowa, the second Iowa race. So this isn't a guy that is trash on ovals, okay? And here's the thing, too, is people want to look at Joseph Newgarden and say, well, without that St. Pete, he's not in the championship race, even if he finished well at St. Even if you give him the win at St. Pete, hypothetically, he's not even in the top 3. Like, I don't think he's in the championship race even if he had a win at St. Pete, because he's had finishes of 16th, 17th, 19th, and 26th, 19th at Laguna Seca. And we'll talk about how he magically was up running second and then fittingly spun and dropped down to 19th. But looking at Laguna Seca overall, really an entertaining race. And the last 2 years, we've had entertaining races at Laguna Seca. But in the end, Alex Palou does what he does, gets the dub. He's the leader now of the point standings. And you and I both agree that the way Alex Palou is, when he captures that top spot in the point standings, he very rarely relinquishes it. And we'll see if he can run away with it like he did a year ago.
He's so consistent, and he's essentially a new Dixon, and he gets out of the car what is there does not take unnecessary chances. And your point about the ovals, it's a matter of when, not if, in terms of getting his first oval win. It wouldn't shock me if we see that in this stretch of ovals coming up later on this season. So let's dive into our three things, our three main takeaways from Laguna Seca. And we talked a lot about Palou, so I'm going to move on to, unfortunately, my biggest takeaway of this race. And that is NBC/USA/ Peacock/ CNBC. Were they on like National Geographic? Like, am I missing any?
NBC Sports
History
Gold.
Channel. Am I missing any channels here?
Any reinforcement that the Fox deal is way better for IndyCar than NBC, you got that on Sunday.
So if you watch live like I did, and you watch after the fact on Peacock, which we'll talk about this in this segment.
Yeah.
But the race coverage, pre-race started on Peacock. NASCAR's in a rain delay. Annoying, whatever. You can kind of move on from that. But then NASCAR's running the Iowa race from the week before
instead of going
to IndyCar.
Which I'm sure in the fine print says NASCAR has precedent, even in a rain delay, and even showing a week-old race instead of showing IndyCar live. That's just the pecking order for IndyCar at NBC.
And the other problem was, so IndyCar is only on Peacock for the pre-race. They don't announce anything until basically right before the green flag drops about, we'll also be on CNBC here shortly.
Right.
And so that's what it was. I never saw anything about the rating. Unfortunately,
I'm sure it's terrible.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this was a case where we thought going into the weekend, this could be a good rating. IndyCar following NASCAR at New Hampshire?
Yep.
USA to USA, and then USA also had 6 hours of the Glen, right, as well for IMSA. So it was a triple header. I mean, this was like prime for ratings for IndyCar. They're on the back end, not the front end or even in the middle. They get the bump, and instead they literally get bumped off USA, Peacock, and CNBC. I mean, that was the first problem, let alone just some things that happened during the race that were just hard to believe. Like, Joseph Newgarden got a penalty. So I had to follow things on timing and scoring to actually know what was going on.
Yeah.
And I saw that Newgarden had dropped way back. I saw that Power had dropped way back. I'm like, well, what happened to him? NBC, or I guess Peacock, and that's how I watched, eventually showed that Power got in the dirt off one of the turns.
It took forever. It took multiple laps to figure out what happened.
I don't think they ever said what happened to Newgarden with him having a second pit stop because he had a penalty. I don't ever remember seeing that on the live broadcast. They went to commercials. The car was literally in the dirt, and there was a cloud of dirt. They cut to break. There
was no side-by-side.
No, and there never is on Peacock, which is annoying.
Which is dumb.
Yeah.
And I don't know why.
You had other issues where they missed a restart live. You said that was fixed on the replay.
Yeah, I watched the replay on Peacock, and I can't speak to the issues that you're talking about, at least the majority, because a lot of that was cleaned up on the replay on Peacock. I mean, so you're the one that was in the trenches watching live.
Yeah, it's frustrating. They were missing penalty calls. They were missing offs. And this wasn't like the broadcast in terms of the broadcasters. I didn't really have any issue there. It's just some of the production stuff and things that they were doing. It was not a typical NBC broadcast. Normally, we get really solid stuff. Like, we're not complaining about these things. We're maybe more complaining about a back and forth with some announcers. But this was a prime example of, we're a lame duck now, so we're just going to mail it in. Because that's what it felt like.
Here's a legitimate question I don't really know the answer to, because IMS Productions is a major part of the NBC broadcast. They'll be a major part of the Fox broadcast. How much of this needs to be laid upon IMS as opposed to NBC? Could we potentially have some of these same issues at Fox with IMS Productions involved, or is it more really laying cable and all that kind of stuff with IMS? I really don't know.
I assume it's the latter.
Okay.
Where they're providing kind of cameras and setup, but in terms of who's directing and producing the broadcasts, I don't think that's IMS Productions.
I don't think so.
I believe
either.
That's on NBC.
But
their properties.
It was bad. And the entire day was an indictment against NBC. You may like the guys in the booth. You may like the guys and girl in the pits. But I think we've gotten used to mediocrity in terms of production. You may not like the graphics package of Fox, which I'm like, is that your real reason not to want Fox? Then again, I always talk crap about the tire type graphic,
which was down for part of the time.
Yeah, well, I was talking about the one in the corner that tells you the difference between the tires. We saw that on lap 20, by the way. I made a note. But it was a bad day all around for NBC. We understand getting bumped by NASCAR because I'm sure that's in the contract and stuff. What we don't understand is the lack of quality broadcast wherever it was, whether you watched on Peacock or CNBC or whatever. It very much, to your point, Caleb, looked like a broadcast of people that were just basically cashing it in. Like, we're just going to finish out the string and whatever, because it wasn't good at all.
It was so noticeable because it was so out of character. This was not something that would normally happen, and there were just so many things that were off base, and I don't know if it had any role whatsoever that Lee Diffie wasn't there. I don't think so. That shouldn't have any impact.
Yeah,
on
I don't
these
think
things.
so.
I mean, Kevin Lee did a solid job. That's not the issue here. It just felt like NBC got the news, oh, we don't have IndyCar contract anymore. Well, we'll bump them to CNBC during this rain delay. I guess I understand that. I would have at least put IndyCar on until NASCAR was ready to go green.
Yes.
And then bump. I know this would make fans mad, but I would understand it more by putting IndyCar on at 6 because NASCAR's in a delay, and then have IndyCar on USA, and then when you have to change, say, hey, during this commercial break, NASCAR will be taking over on the channel. You can find us still on Peacock or on CNBC.
Right.
Like, I would have been more understanding of that than by what they did by showing the previous week's NASCAR Cup race and relegating IndyCar at the time to just Peacock only.
Well, I'm sure it's all in the fine print, but the thing is it was IndyCar's window.
Yes.
Okay, as soon as 6 o'clock comes, it should have switched over to IndyCar. You can switch back, but again, I'm sure it's all in the fine print, but maybe this is one of the reasons why, because I think it shows just the importance or lack thereof that NBC has put on IndyCar. If a week-old NASCAR race is more important and gets priority over a live IndyCar race, then that tells you a lot about the importance that NBC has put on IndyCar, and thus fuels the switch to Fox and saying we're going to a place that's going to really value us more. You may not like Fox. You may very much attach to the broadcasters and the pit reporters on NBC, but the fact of the matter is Sunday was proof and an indictment that NBC doesn't hold IndyCar in high regard at all.
Yeah, and I get people were upset, and they're upset about losing Peacock, but again, we're talking about 5 to 6% of total viewership on a non-Indy 500 race. Like, if this were to happen with Fox, IndyCar would just move to FS1 or FS2.
Yeah, it's
not as
smooth
dire
transition, but
and people know where to find. It's a sports channel,
and it's still in your Fox or in your sports channels. If you get Venue, it'll still be in that. You're not moving to CNBC, and you're interrupting Rachel Maddow talking about finances or whatever on CNBC.
Or missing another rerun of what's the Shark Tank.
Oh, is that what they put on CNBC all the time?
It's on there nonstop.
Yeah, so if you needed any added incentive or proof that IndyCar made the right decision to go to Fox, you saw it with the Laguna Seca race.
Absolutely. What's your first takeaway?
Well, let's talk Alex Palou. We talked about it a little bit, but I want to look at really looking at his drive. And what I was really impressed with is, and this was proof of just how good of a driver he is, and it wasn't late in the race. It was early in the race. When Kyle Kirkwood took the lead.
Which was an outstanding move at the start.
Yes. And Alex Palou was behind him for a fair amount of about 20 or so laps through the first stint. And that was an impressive drive for Alex Palou because he was clearly the faster car once things got going. It's a great move by Kirkwood, but as everything settled in, Alex Palou was the faster car. But championships are won and lost, and races are won and lost by making bad moves. And Alex Palou could have forced the issue at any time during that first stint and got a run on Kyle Kirkwood and said, I'm faster anyway, so I'm going to dive bomb in a corner or make a crazy move in the corkscrew, something like that. But Alex Palou knew early in the race, I'm just going to bide my time. I'm going to protect my tires. I'm going to stay on his gearbox. If he makes a mistake, I'm going to capitalize. But I'm not going to endanger my race by making a bad move or a big mistake and potentially ending up in the gravel or into the fence. And I thought that was the most impressive part of Alex Palou's race and really shows just how good of a driver he is. There aren't many drivers in IndyCar, I don't think, that for 20-some laps would stay behind a car that they're faster than. At some point, they would try to make a move. They would be overeager, they would be impatient, and they would do something, and maybe they do make the pass, or they take both of them out. And I thought that was a great example of how great of a driver Alex Palou is. He takes what's there. He doesn't make too many over-aggressive moves. Not saying he never does, but he rarely does. And that was, in my opinion, the key to his win is not forcing the issue early in the race on Kyle Kirkwood. Other things over the course of the race overshadowed that, but that first stint to me was exceptional driving, very impressive, and why Alex Palou is one of the best drivers in this series.
Well, and it was clear throughout the race he had the fastest car among that lead group that was there for most of the race. Grosjean came in late with a fourth, but between Kirkwood, Rossi, Herta, and Palou clearly had the best car in terms of pace. And when he got out front, they were not able to catch him, obviously. And I think the other thing that's really impressive is that he was basically tailing Kirkwood for the bulk of that first stint, first 25 laps or so, and was right there on his rear wing, still managed his tires.
Yes.
That's also really impressive to me.
Because he started on blacks, right?
Yes.
And then he put another set of blacks on. And that was kind of, even Alex Palou kind of questioned the strategy and all that, but made sense to go blacks, black. I think he went black, black, red, black, I think is what he did. And a lot of people were like, what is he going to go on black, black? But it turned out, his strategy was correct. But I thought it was a all-around impressive drive because it showed Alex Palou in the latter half of the race doing what he needed to do in an aggressive manner, but not a dangerous manner. But then early in the race, just waiting, lurking, going, I'm not going to do anything that could potentially ruin my entire race. I'm going to sit here. I know I'm the fastest car on the grid and on track. I'm just going to wait until pit cycles and get up front. And that's exactly what he did. Ended up leading 48 laps, including, the final 20 laps or so to get the win.
And Palou said post-race, he said he wasn't executing. The car was fast, but I couldn't overtake Kyle. Kind of put us in a bad position. I mean, he was right there, but also you got to manage the race. You don't need to make any ridiculous moves early on and throw the race away, and he's certainly not going to do that. Then the risky strategy, it paid off for Palou and Barry Wanzer, who made the call to stay out, which, I mean, at the time we all thought, what? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, right?
But cautions breed cautions, as they say, and that's exactly what happened, and it worked out. So, I mean, this is a situation where, I mean, yes, does it feel like it always works out for these championship contenders? Of course. But This was at the time I thought, that's a really weird call to not pit when everyone else did.
And it ended up working. I mean, when Scott Dixon goes in, usually it's like whatever Scott Dixon does, you do the same.
Yes.
And he didn't. And it ended up working out. And here's something. I know we have half of a season left to go, but I thought this was interesting. You mentioned Scott Dixon, 6-time champion, right? He won his third championship in 2013 at age 32. If Alex Palou wins the championship, his third, by the way, at 27 years old. I'm not saying he's going to end up winning 6 championships or not, but what I am saying, the best of the modern era in Scott Dixon won his third championship at 32, and Alex Palou could be in the same position 5 years younger if he wins this championship. It's pretty wild. I mean, he's setting the tone for what could be an historic career in IndyCar.
And it's not like a situation where he's at the tail end of his career having all this success that had been built up like one of Dixon's former teammates and Dario Franchitti.
Yeah.
Toward the end of his career, his final season was 2013, and he didn't finish that season because of the crash at Houston. But, 2007, 9, 10, 11, won championships, won 3 Indy 500s when you tack on 2012 that year onto that. That was at the end of his career. He was competitive early in his career in kart. But this is right from the get-go, a rookie year with a small team in Coyne, gets an opportunity at Ganassi, and it's kind of one of those, you got to prove it to keep the job, and he's done more than that. He's one of the best handful of drivers in the series and has been really since his first championship. So what he's done is very impressive. You just kind of wonder, yes, he's 27, but is there an opportunity perhaps in F1? I don't know, because it feels like he kind of burned that bridge, but we'll see.
Yeah, you never know.
It'd be hard to look away, though, from these results.
For sure.
If he were to win the championship again this year.
Well, and you look at, if you're talking Spanish drivers and Fernando Alonso getting a little bit long in the tooth, does a team at some point, you never know what's going to happen in Formula One. Could a major backer in Spain really say we want to be part of Formula One and we want a Spanish driver, and it happens? But consider this. Of the last 22 races dating back to the Indy Road Course last year, Alex Palou won 8 of the races, 8 of 22.
It's wild.
He's just in a dominant form right now, and if he can win championship number 3 at age 27, he will have beaten the best of this era by 5 years in winning 3 championships. What's your number 2?
My number 2, we got to talk about Juncos Hollinger Racing and Romain Grosjean. Good qualifying effort, led his group in Q1. Group 2 of qualifying. Yes. Had pace, just missed out on the Firestone Fast 6. And then in the race, he was kind of there, and then suddenly one of the restarts made that aggressive move to get by Pato O'Ward, who, didn't really have a car to compete up at the front where he was at the time. And then, Grosjean just continued to be patient, to do what he needs to do. It's a track he's had success at before. A couple years ago, didn't he get a podium at Laguna Seca? But this was an impressive drive, a massive boost for that team. Some positive news to talk about with them after all the chaos over the last few weeks, and a big result for him. I think it's something that can get him some confidence. Laguna Seca is the kind of track he can excel at, and he's done so in the past. He did it again this year. 4th place finish, best ever for the team. So a big weekend for him and for Juncos Hollinger.
It was a definite change of pace for Juncos Hollinger to have a weekend like this, really capped off by that 4th place finish, just missing the podium for Romain Grosjean. He's 14th right now in points. You say outside chance maybe to sneak in to the top 10. But think about this, Caleb. The last 2 years with Andretti Autosport, Romain Grosjean finished 13th in points in each season. He is 14th in points right now for Juncos. So I think it's people just want to talk about AJ Foyt Racing and just what they're doing with Santino Ferrucci, and that's impressive. But what Juncos Hollinger has been able to do with Romain Grosjean is very impressive too. The problem when you look at the second half of the season is you have 6 ovals left on the schedule, 6 oval races, and Romain Grosjean hasn't exactly been tremendous on ovals. Don't blame him, considering they're still new to him, but he's been on a good run with Road America 7th, Laguna Seca 4th. If he can get a good finish at Mid-Ohio, it would be further really push him up the standings, you would think. But then you get into that second half where you have 6 oval races, and can he continue that momentum? You look at it and say, can Romain Grosjean finish in the top 12 in points, which would be huge for Juncos? Yeah, but he's going to have to race smart. And we talk about how smart Alex Palou is, right? Not pushing anything. I don't think we ever use those words with Romain Grosjean very often. But he's going to have to race smart in the second half of the year and really figure ovals out if he's going to really look and try to finish in that top 12.
The good news for him, when you look at ovals, Iowa Speedway, that's a doubleheader coming up. Obviously, we don't have a comparison for Milwaukee. Gateway, he's been solid, 14th, 13th, 12th. But at Iowa, in his 4 starts, 7th and 9th and 22, 11th and 12th and 23. So if he could be hovering around the top 10, those are the kind of results that could propel you forward in the championship. And I'm not saying we're expecting him and that team to get a top 10 points finish when it's all said and done, especially with the weird balance of the schedule.
Right.
But could he hover around 12th, 13th, 14th? I mean, I think that's realistic. And to me, finishing 14th with 27 full-time entries is a lot more impressive than, finishing 10th with 22 entries.
Well, or even 13th the last 2 years at Andretti is equally impressive. So if you can get that out of that car, and you can have Canapino and that car finish in the leader circle, of which they are 21st right now, or at least 21st as of a couple races ago. The Wikipedia
it's not updated.
Yeah, come on, Wikipedia, whoever's running this thing. But if they can do that and have both finish in the leader circle, and Romain Grosjean finish in the top 12 to 14 of points, I think that's a tremendous season for Juncos Hollinger. They have other issues to work out, but at least on track, that would be a successful season.
For sure. What's your number 2?
What is my number 2? Let's talk about Nolan Siegel, because FP1, he's last, and started, and that was like the low point. He moved up throughout the course of the weekend. Started 23rd, and then somehow finished 12th. And this is another indictment on NBC. All of a sudden, Nolan Siegel was up in the teens, and you never knew how. What was the strategy to get him up there? Was he just passing along a car? I have no idea. What I do know is Nolan Siegel in his first race with McLaren, and basically what did he have, 48 hours, something like that, prior to the weekend to get acclimated, to be able to not only bring home the car clean, but bring it home in 12th, was very, very impressive. We've talked ad nauseum about Nolan Siegel and whether it's a good idea, bad idea, whatever. Does McLaren have the patience for a 19-year-old trying to figure things out? But through one weekend, Nolan Siegel showed why McLaren gave him a multi-year contract, in the sense that a dude with very little experience, still really unfamiliar with the team, A, stays out of trouble, B, brings it home in 12th. It was an impressive drive by Nolan Siegel.
And all the scuttlebutt about, well, is he bringing money to secure the ride? And this is what they're saying, so we'll take them at their word. But in terms of if sponsorship, a.k.a. money, led to his new contract with McLaren, he said no.
And that's why McLaren is, they'll take some money. I just have a hard time that McLaren is just putting him in the seat because he brings money. McLaren has crazy money. Okay. This isn't, and everybody knows it's not, we're not talking coin here, but even Chip Ganassi Racing takes ride buyers. And we see that with 2 of their cars on the grid this year. But this is not a ride buy. It may be bringing some sponsorship and some money, but it is not a move that McLaren made strictly because Nolan Siegel's family has deep pockets. They legitimately feel like Nolan Siegel can develop into a star in this series. My big thing is notoriously impatient McLaren. Do they have the patience with Nolan Siegel as a 19-year-old to figure it out? But I was very impressed with what he did at Laguna Seca.
Especially after halfway through the race, he spins, causes a caution, doesn't go a lap down, is able to fight back. And yes, there was a lot of carnage in the last 20 laps or so.
There very much was, yes.
But your ability to avoid that is also impressive. Like, yeah, you have to be lucky, but you have to be lucky to be good, right? And I think it was an impressive drive. And on the flip side, you look at David Malukas, top 12 qualifying result, which was unbelievable. And then he was running toward the front. He had a flat tire late, fell back to finish in, 16th? Mm-hmm. But it was a good weekend. I think for him, just completing all the laps, staying on the lead lap is impressive. So for both those guys, in different situations, all centered, of course, around McLaren. It was a good weekend.
It definitely was. And this is something weird, too, and I don't know. I'm looking at the box score right now. Linus Lundqvist finished 17th, which is one pit stop. That can't be right. Right?
That can't be right.
You seeing the same thing I am?
Yeah.
Yeah, that can't be right. But if so, I want to know the strategy on that with one pit stop over 95 laps. But no, I was very impressed with Nolan Siegel and David Malukas this weekend. Just one race, but when you look at him, particularly with how Nolan Siegel started the weekend, he finished it very strong. What's your number 3?
My number 3. So I want to talk about 2 other drivers who had to overcome some things that happened on track, not the off-track stuff like Siegel and Malukas. And that is 2 guys who finished in back-to-back finishing positions on the edge of the top 10. Santino Ferrucci in 9th, Marcus Ericsson in 10th. Now, Santino Ferrucci and that Foyt program continue to impress.
They do.
Getting top 10s for Foyt on road courses is impressive. He's currently sitting in the championship just outside the top 10 in 12th. I mean, it's a very good result so far, and if he can finish top 12, that would be unbelievable for the Foyt team. Marcus Ericsson, he had multiple off-track excursions during this race, including one where he was coming back on track as Newgarden was pitting, and they almost collided. Would have been horrifying.
Yes. Very close.
But for him, I mean, he spun. He went off, what, twice, 3 times?
I think at least twice that I remember.
At least twice. But for both of them to finish where they did, because I remember thinking early in this race, I mean, okay, Ericsson's gone off. He's not really improving. His disastrous season continues. For him to get a 10th, he also had the fastest lap of the race. Very impressive. And then for Ferrucci, who had to give up 6 spots for a blocking penalty, which was, I mean, he blocked.
He did.
Now, 6 spots, I don't know. I don't know how they decide these things. But for him to battle back and finish 9th, very impressive. Both those guys moved up through the field. Again, the winner largely comes from the front row in this race, and that trend continues. But to get a good result, you can move up. And for them, starting 17th and 18th, so next to each other, to get 9th and 10th was a good drive.
It was, and when you look at Santino Ferrucci in particular, it is his 5th top 10 finish this season, which is you'd have to really look into the last time somebody had 5 top 10 finishes for Foyt in a season, let alone half a season. He's currently 12th in points. And here's my question with Foyt. 2 questions. Well, it kind of generalizes and go into one. Are they going to give Santino Ferrucci the support to take that next step? In 2 ways. 1, financing, and 2, getting him a real teammate. Stingray Robb is last in IndyCar among full-time drivers in points this season. He has not finished above 16th this year, and that was at the 500. Stingray Robb is not cutting it in this series. If you want to support Santino Ferrucci, you A, continue to bring in financing to up that team, and B, get him a worthy teammate.
So the problem is Stingray brings the financing, right?
That's the problem, though, is you need to find financing elsewhere. You need to use the season that Santino Ferrucci has put together this year and sell that. And that's the job of the team. Certain members of the team is going, hey, look what we're doing. How do we take the next step? And that's bringing in money. And I think Stingray Robb is just a non-factor in this series. And it hurts Santino Ferrucci to not have a competent teammate. And you hope that this changes for 2025, because I think Santino Ferrucci and this team have a good thing going on with that car. And he is very much AJ-like in his approach and brusque attitude and doesn't care who he pisses off. And AJ loves that stuff because that's how he was. And you look at what this team has been able to do with one of its cars, it just needs to bring that support to take the next step. You know, the Penske affiliation or partnership helps for sure, but finally some positive momentum, not just a decent finish here or there with Foyt Racing like we've had the last couple years. Oh, they finished 8th. Could this be a change? No, 5 top tens for Santino Ferrucci this season. That's consistent, proven results. Can they continue this upward trajectory with Ferrucci going into 2025?
So 2 things. One, Santino Ferrucci, his 3rd place at Indy last year was his only finish inside the top 10.
Last year.
Yeah, last season.
Crazy. And remember, after that happened, everybody was like, oh my gosh, look at Foyt. Okay, this is going to change fortunes. It didn't. Right? In terms of last season.
Yes.
It wasn't consistent like we're seeing this year. Yeah. He hasn't finished better than 7th this year, but 5 top 10s is 5 top 10s.
Now, the last time there were more than 5 top 10s finishes by one car in a season.
Vitor Mira.
No, not that far back.
Okay.
But you have to go back to 2017 with Carlos Munoz in the 14 car. He had 6 for the season, but his best finish that year was 7th at Long Beach.
And that's for the entire season. I mean,
yes.
We look at, 9 races left, something like that. And Santino Ferrucci could easily surpass that. Needs 2 top 10s in the last 9 races to better that mark. So very impressed with what Ferrucci has been able to do, particularly when he's basically on an island with the other car on that team being a non-factor.
For sure. Any other takeaways, anything you want to mention about this race?
Well, I've got to talk race control.
Yeah, that's true.
And that'll be my number 3. I know so many people were like, well, figures, they don't wave the yellow so it benefits Joseph Newgarden. This isn't a Joseph Newgarden issue. This is a race control issue. This is what they do. As long as nobody is directly in the racing line, and you could argue, though, that spin, and they even mentioned it on the broadcast, if somebody comes over that hill and gets off track, that could be very dangerous. But this is what the series does. Unless it's a big issue on the racing line, they're going to let everybody pit. It just so happened to benefit Joseph Newgarden, so then he could restart second. Ended up dropping back to 19th, poetic justice of sorts. But I guess this is just the latest example of how IndyCar calls their races. This just so happened to benefit a Penske driver and Joseph Newgarden.
This is standard operating procedure for race control the last few years.
Correct.
We both disagree with it because to me it's a safety issue. Why is it in some instances they throw the caution immediately and others they wait? Like it's one thing if a driver is completing a lap or whatever, but they waited. I think it was over a minute.
Lap.
Yeah, it was basically a full lap before the yellow actually came out. And Marcus Armstrong is sitting there on the edge of the track. Like it's not safe.
We've said it before. I mean, you're playing with fire when you're trying to allow everybody to go through the pit cycle and with a car that isn't maybe directly on the racing line, but anything could happen to where another car has an off and they collide. And then how are you explaining that? So I know with the emotions of people with Joseph Newgarden, it fired people up more than it typically does with this call. But as you said, this is standard operating procedure for race control. I just don't understand why IndyCar officials have not stepped in and told the stewards that, and Kyle Novak, like you have to throw the yellow. You're playing with fire here, particularly if a car, he may not be directly on the racing line, but it's not like he's off grid completely. He's brought it into a runoff area. He's on track. And it seems like overly dangerous to me, just so people can pit. I don't like it.
I don't like it, and people are upset, of course, because it benefited Joseph Newgarden. That's just the call that they make. It really has nothing to do with Newgarden.
No,
it's just how they relay this call. I don't like it. You don't like it. I know a lot of fans don't like it. It is what it is.
This is the way it is right now.
I just wish there was some consistency. If it's a caution, it's a caution. If it's not, it's not.
And people want to talk about NASCAR and, manipulating cautions and stuff like that. This is almost like that. Not throwing the caution to manipulate the results. Look, racing forever has been good luck, bad luck. Sometimes the caution comes out when you don't want it because you are either haven't pitted or you have pitted or whatever. But that's racing. And IndyCar trying to manipulate the unpredictability of when yellows fall is gimmicky to me.
I would agree.
Just if there is a caution, if there's an issue on track, throw the caution immediately. If it screws somebody's race, that's racing. That's my thing.
IndyCar has enough gimmicks with alternate tires and push to pass and
and
getting the lap back, right? If you're
the wave around, all that
wave
stuff.
Around.
Yeah, don't come out with as with NASCAR's gimmicks, because we can come back with plenty of IndyCar gimmicks for sure.
For sure. All right, if you agree or disagree with us, and I'm sure there's probably some disagreement here, we'd love for you to interact with us. You can always find us online on our website, newtrackrecordpodcast.com. Over there, you can check out the store. We have T-shirts and stickers available for you. Plus, you can sign up for the email list. It is free. You'll get emails for new episodes when they come out and any special announcements. You can follow us on social media, IndyCar Podcast, Instagram, Twitter/X, whatever we're supposed to call it these days. Facebook, just search for New Track Record. Our email address, newtrackrecordpodcast@gmail.com. And you can support us via Patreon, patreon.com/newtrackrecord. Thanks to Xavier and others for their support. And as always, listen and download to the podcast for free on your favorite podcasting platform: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, CastBox, Pocket Casts, YouTube Music, wherever you find your podcasts. And again, listen in for free. Mailbag time, Justin, and we start off with Rate the Race. So how would you rate the Firestone Grand Prix of Monterey?
I had it as a 7.5. I think there was a lot of action throughout, some excitement. It wasn't procedural. We weren't. We didn't have to fall back on talking about Zanardi's pass in '96 too much to really make this race exciting.
What lap was it that it actually came out in 35?
Yeah, I thought we made it a lot deeper than I thought we would. But of course, we were going to get the replay. Like nobody's ever passed anybody in the corkscrew since 1996. But I digress. I thought it was a very solid race. Some people rated it higher, some people rated it lower, but I had it at 7.5. What about you?
I'm going to go a little higher. I have to stick to what I said. I want to lower it, but I was very entertained by this race. Despite race control and NBC production stuff, I mean, to me, those aren't elements. Like, yes, I guess race control a little bit, but it didn't impact the race a whole lot. But the elements of the on-track stuff was very exciting. I'm going to give it a 9. I know that's really high, but I was very entertained. You had passes for the lead on track. You had multiple strategies. You had good racing. You had chaos the final 20 laps. And Laguna Seca is typically a track that up until the repave has not produced very exciting racing. Right. That has not been the case the last 2 years.
No, it's been thoroughly entertaining races for the last 2 years, and I thought the crowd was pretty good. I felt. At least.
I have no way to tell if the crowd is
me neither.
Up, down, whatever.
And maybe it's a California thing. Maybe I associate Sonoma and Laguna Seca together too much because Sonoma was always a ghost town, it felt like. But I thought there was a fair amount of people at Laguna Seca. The problem is with me is now next year for the third straight year, we're messing with the weekend of Laguna Seca. We talk about date equity. Mm-hmm. And I think it is a race that if it continues to deliver on track, quit playing around with the date, because I think it has an opportunity with the repave and the excitement that we've seen in the on-track racing in the last couple years. It can become a staple on the West Coast for IndyCar. But you're messing around with the date for the third straight year heading into next year, and we know how that can cause a significant issue in terms of fans coming to races.
For sure. That's the fear. Our listeners, the average 6.71 for Rate the Race. So they liked it less
a little lower,
than we did.
I guess I grade on a curve because I'm used to procedural, boring Laguna Seca races, and I thought this delivered for the second straight year.
I grade on a curve as well. I grade my Rate the Race when we do this based on the track.
Yes.
I do not do it overall. It's based on the track and what we see or do not see.
Yes.
So I was impressed. Our listeners apparently not so much.
Which usually, well, at least me, I'm usually the pessimist, but I think both of us were above the average.
Oh, for sure. Definitely. All right, taking a look at other entries for the mailbag this week, and this courtesy of Leonard PDX telling us about, for people, so we talked about DVR for network TV. For TV antenna people, which, again, you can get an antenna $20 to $30. It's a solid one. You can spend a little more. You could probably spend a little less. But he says for TV antenna people, you can buy a cheap DVR for $25. TiVo is way more expensive. So, and he linked to Amazon. So just a heads up for people preparing ahead for next season when IndyCar goes to Fox.
I was thinking about this since last week, and the more I get annoyed at people complaining about having to pay for cable or stream or whatever. In this day and age, if you want to watch the shows or sports or whatever that you want to watch, you're going to have to pay money. Whether your favorite shows are on Max or Hulu or Prime or Live Sport, you're going to have to pay to watch these. And in the big scheme of things, not that big of a deal. If you want to support the series, if you want to watch the series, if you're as big of a fan of the series as some people like to say they are, and then they're saying they're not going to watch because they have to get cable, how big of a fan really are you?
You also don't have to get cable.
Yeah, you do, yeah. It's.
I mean, you do have to get
for
something.
FS1, FS2 if you want to watch all the practice,
but to watch the races,
and all that stuff.
an antenna will get you everything you need.
Yeah. Also, before I forget, IndyCar testing at Iowa on Thursday. So that will be interesting considering the repave or semi-repave that they did at Iowa, and see if it affects the racing lines. Hopefully we have at least 1.5 at Iowa. We'll see. So that's going to be a pivotal test on Thursday here as we record Wednesday morning.
Yes. Continuing on in the mailbag, I posted a poll nearing the halfway point of the IndyCar schedule, which next week, unless some crazy news story happens, going into Mid-Ohio, we will do our IndyCar midseason grades for the teams. Always fun to do that. But I posted a poll question, who wins the championship? 70% of you said Palou, nearly 10% said Power, 13% Dixon, 7% said Other. A few replies here. Aaron J. Richmond saying Palou is almost impossible to beat. He finishes 8th on his worst days. He'd be leading the championship by a mile if Newgarden hadn't spun in front of him at Detroit. And that is true.
Yeah.
Mom 2X over 2002 says Power, because after last year with his wife, I think he deserves it. IndyCar Man said Newgarden wins 5 of the next 9. OBX Jody said, I'm torn between Kirkwood and Stingray Robb. I feel like Kirkwood needs to have a heart-to-heart with his strategist. Well, that's Brian Herta. Actually trying to win races. I know Kirkwood wants to. I'm not so sure about his strategist. Seems to be okay with top 10s. I just think they haven't had the pace in terms of a winning car. They've had good cars,
right, but
they've not had the pace like he had last year, for example, at Long Beach.
Well, and somebody we didn't mention, too, coming out of the race was Colton Herta and his frustrations, once again, having to meet a fuel number. And I'm becoming more and more... Legitimately, sometimes Andretti screws over strategy. Okay, that's a given. But I also believe when we talk about the best in terms of fuel mileage on track, even when they're not quote unquote fuel saving, it's Scott Dixon. Colton Herta is at the complete other end of the spectrum. I don't think he knows how not to go max fuel burn all the time, and that's why You always hear Rob Edwards and him going back and forth about fuel numbers, because I think Colton Herta just doesn't understand how to not race 100% all the time, because he still had to conserve fuel even with the yellows late in that race.
And he had way more push to pass. It was surprising.
Right. And nobody else had to. So people were like, well, they pitted him early. Plenty of people pitted on the same lap that didn't have to fuel save. And that happens a lot with Colton Herta. And I think it's driving style. He needs to change the way he drives in certain instances, certain scenarios and situations to make sure he's in a position to go full rich at the end of races. I don't blame Andretti for every instance that this happens.
Unless he was short-filled on that stop, which I don't know.
Never heard.
Was never mentioned.
Not that it didn't happen. We're just saying it was never mentioned. I just feel like Colton Herta needs to really, really improve in terms of how he races. I talked about Alex Palou biding his time at P2 for the first 20-some laps behind Kyle Kirkwood. I don't think Colton Herta could do that same thing. Colton Herta would be a guy that would push, and try to get past Kyle Kirkwood. And so I look at Colton Herta and say there are two factors to me that are preventing him from being a championship contender. A, he doesn't race for Penske or Ganassi. B, He doesn't know how not to go 100% all the time. And I know some people will say, well, that's racing. It's not racing. There's more strategy.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. There's more strategy than anything. You cannot go 100% all the time, every race, and expect to win a lot. And I just don't think that yet is in Colton Herta's repertoire to do that. And the latest instance was Sunday at Laguna Seca.
So you think he can't fuel save? I think he would say to you, well, you can't podcast. So.
Both are fair
fair
assessments. Yes, I would say so.
A couple other thoughts on the championship poll. Hunter's Way 67 said, it's over, Palou again, yawn. And Indy 500 Trump says, Power's the sneaky pick. Ovals of the N will likely strongly favor him over all competitors except for his teammates, both of whom may be too far behind already. They are too far behind. Yeah. In fact, can we just move on with the notion? I know people keep wanting to say, well, I was still on the schedule and Joseph Newgarden's the short oval master. I understand. You can't dig that big of a hole. He has 3 finishes now, 19th or worse. Yeah, it's just done. Not going to cut it.
No, not going to happen.
And for Scott McLaughlin, his teammate, 3 finishes of 20th or worse. Not going to cut it.
People talk Will Power. Can you tell me the last race win for Will Power on an oval?
Say that again.
The last win for Will Power on an oval. People saying, well, there's a lot of ovals coming up. When's the last time Will Power won on an oval?
This sounds too absurd, but the 2018 Indy 500?
Close. It was the 2019 race at Pocono.
Ah, wow.
Was the last time he won at an oval. So we look at the schedule and say, oh, a lot of ovals coming up. Will Power, I don't know, because he hasn't won at ovals. Granted, Alex Palou hasn't never won at an oval, but it's not like Will Power is Joseph Newgarden winning at a bunch of ovals. And I could say Joseph Newgarden can come out and win 4 of the 6 oval races that are left. He's still not sniffing the championship. He's over 100 points behind. He's out of it. It's over.
Well, I think it's funny. So in the Racer mailbag this week, they do the throwback Robin Miller question, and it was talking about Will Power on ovals, and I forget what date this mailbag was from, but the comp was Rick Mears, and Rick, after his big crash, only won once on a road course. And that was 89, I want to say.
Okay.
So it just, totally different situation. I just thought it was an interesting kind of comparison here.
Yeah. So it's, people want to say, well, the people behind Alex Palou have a lot of wins on ovals. Not recently. In terms of the other 2 title contenders, and at least in Will Power's case, Scott Dixon, he won at Gateway last year, didn't he? That was his last win on an oval. So if you're looking at guys that have most recent wins on ovals, it'd be Scott Dixon. Here's a question for you. As we reach kind of the unofficial halfway point, again, like you mentioned, next week we'll do our full review of team by team. Which driver that does not yet have a win this season in the first half will get a win in the second half of the season?
That's a great question.
Because all the main players have gotten a win. Because you talk about Palou and Dixon and the 3 Penske's.
I think the 3 to 4 options you look at, Lundgaard, Rossi, Kirkwood, Herta.
Yeah. Colton Herta has, 2 seconds and a third this year?
Maybe you add in a Grosjean. Or not a Grosjean, sorry, Ericsson. I was looking at Ericsson, said Grosjean.
If I had to bet, I would say Colton Herta gets a win.
I would too, only because his pace has been too strong.
Right.
And I don't think of Mid-Ohio as a track he's particularly good at, but he's just had good pace on every road and street circuit, let alone had great pace of the 500. And he doesn't have an oval win.
Has he never won an oval?
No.
Wow.
So maybe that's something that comes into play here.
Man, those Penske's are just so good at those short ovals.
Yes.
And that's the thing, is everybody's talking about all these ovals. Iowa, Penske's dominant.
Now, Herta did win at Mid-Ohio in 2020 when they had double header races there.
Right.
But, he's never won on an oval, to put it in perspective.
Here's another quick question for you. So if we have 6 oval races left, How many does Penske win?
4.
4? I would say 5, but we'll see. But yes, a lot of racing to go, but a lot of racing at places where one particular team is dominant.
Yeah. There's nothing else to say.
Yeah.
It is true.
And maybe that's okay. That fuels Will Power's chances to catch Alex Palou. But again, it's been 5 years since Will Power has won an oval.
Hard to believe. Like when I said the Indy 500, I was kind of joking because I just figured it was such an absurd stat. But I didn't
you weren't
realize
far off.
It was that close of a guess.
Yeah, you weren't far off.
Time to take a look at news and notes, and the big news item to lead this off, Toby Sowery set to make his IndyCar debut with Dale Coyne Racing at Mid-Ohio in the number 51 entry. So expect to see him at Mid-Ohio. Maybe he could do other races. Luca Giotto has a conflict, and he was never scheduled for Mid-Ohio, and you kind of wonder, there's speculation, who's going to be in that seat. Is it Teo Porcher? Could be perhaps a Connor Daly or someone else, who's ran a few races here and there. But he is set to make his IndyCar debut. 28 years old. Competed in Indy Lights. He won a race in Lights, correct?
Yes, he did. He, in 2019, actually finished third in the championship that year between two teams, Team Pelfrey and HMD. Had 18 starts, 1 win that year. Had a couple spot starts in 2021. Ran the entire season in 2021 with Juncos in Lights. Ran 3 races with HMD in 2023 in Indy Lights. Lately has been doing some Asian Le Mans series. I know you follow that pretty well, pretty hard. And then was racing in LMP2 in a few races in IMSA this year. So a guy that's bringing some money, that is getting an opportunity to start his first ever IndyCar race at Mid-Ohio.
Yeah, and he's a guy who, in karting, beat Norris and Russell.
Oh.
Apparently.
We'll see what he can do. And the fill-ins for Coyne this year haven't been terrible. We'll see if Toby Sowery can continue that at Mid-Ohio.
Really just needs... Coyne just needs some stability, and we expect Catherine Legg to run the oval races in that entry to close out the year. I mean, they just desperately need some results, and by having a handful of drivers in that entry is not going to help that aspect, but you just hope they can get some sort of result.
That's what
he did 3 races last year with HMD in Lights.
He did, yep. So we'll see how he's able to perform heading into Mid-Ohio. I think it's an opportunity for Toby Sowery to get a taste of IndyCar. Is it a long-term thing? Probably not, but he earns the start. Probably bringing a decent check.
6th driver and the number 51 entry so far this season. Well, we're halfway through.
Yeah, they could still reach 10. It's attainable.
So that's the first note. Meanwhile, taking a look at other drivers and other possibilities. So Teo Porcher, obviously trying to get back in the fold in IndyCar, and the Sauber F1 team looking to find him a new home in IndyCar after he was dropped by McLaren. So he left his seat in Super Formula to race in IndyCar. Obviously impressed with McLaren. But Sauber F1 team rep Alessandro Aluni Bravi said the team cannot be happy at Porcher's deal being canceled. This per motorsport.com. Understood McLaren's position would look instead for an alternative ride. So obviously they view him getting seat time as important. And he's a reserve driver for them in F1, but you don't just want to sit on the sidelines. He's not there to just pay to be a reserve driver. They want him to have racing opportunities. They're working with him to secure another seat in IndyCar, hopeful to do some races this year.
Do you still think that Coyne is the most likely place for him this year if he's going to get some more starts, or do you look at somewhere else?
I would look at somewhere else.
Could you see, say, a extra car, or do you think he replaces somebody?
You just never know what could happen in terms of crashes and injuries. True. And not that I'm wishing for that to happen. It's just, it's the reality of IndyCar, right? And yes, the Coyne seat, but you look at the schedule, I mean, you have Portland and you have Toronto, and that's it in terms of non-oval races left after Mid-Ohio. So I guess you take what you can get for him and just get him experience, but it sounds like they want him to be in IndyCar a couple races this year, and then obviously I think moving forward next year.
I know Stingray Robb brings money. Would you be surprised if there's a move at some point in the season?
I'd be surprised.
Especially if Sauber is bringing money and saying, okay, whatever Stingray Robb is bringing, we'll match it and surpass it a little bit, and we want Theo Pourchaire to run the rest of the season and maybe next season with Foyt.
I'd be surprised.
Would you?
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see if he finds a spot.
But as teams get more desperate for leader circle toward the end, maybe there's a move.
Yeah, it's definitely a good point.
So that's the latest on him. That's really the latest on silly season in general. It's not like there's a whole lot going on after the craziness the last couple of weeks. But for the coin car, so Nathan Brown of the Indy Star had this one driver short of Dale Coyne Racing's 2015 two-car lineup that had 8 drivers.
Plenty of time to beat that, huh?
Pippa Mann, Carlos Huertas, Rocky Moran Jr., who only did a practice session at Long Beach before injuring his wrist, Connor Daly, Rodolfo Gonzalez, Tristan Vautier, Francesco Draconi, and James Davison.
How about that?
So well on their way, but obviously wishing Toby Sowery the best of luck in his IndyCar debut. Couple other IndyCar notes for you, or things related to IndyCar. First off, you have at Gateway, the USAC Silver Crown has been added to Friday night on the oval. So that will be cool. A 75-mile race on the oval for Gateway weekend. Meanwhile, Joseph Newgarden has been named the honorary race official for the Ally 400 at Nashville Superspeedway when NASCAR is there.
What's that even mean, honorary race official?
I don't know. So that's coming up this weekend, 3:30 Eastern.
I saw that and I was like, okay, honorary starter? No. Grand Marshal? No. What does honorary race official?
So it says special appearance, trackside live in the Echo Park Fan Zone, stage 11. Or Echo Park Fan Zone stage 11:15 a.m. I assume that's Central Time. So
he's just going to be there is basically what is that saying. Okay, gotcha.
Meanwhile, Alex Palou is up for the ESPYs for Best Driver. Ryan Blaney of NASCAR, Matt Hagan of NHRA, and Max Verstappen of Formula One. I would assume Verstappen wins that.
Seems pretty
likely.
Formality.
Not really a surprise there. Some other notes. There are some rumors for next year. Rumor that Prima has signed Logan Sargent.
Which is weird because there's still half of the F1 season going on. I mean, everybody assumes he's out of a ride, but could an announcement be made that Prima is racing it or running him next year before F1's even over? I guess that's how things happen sometimes, right?
Things happen quickly.
Yeah.
Meyer Shank Racing and Andretti Global negotiating to continue their alliance, that per motorsport.com. Not really a surprise there. There were rumors that the deal could be coming to an end, but Michael Shank says they're still working on it. Elsewhere, DeJuan Jones has been named the Grand Marshal of the Honda Indy 200 in Mid-Ohio, so he's an Indy native, plays for the Cleveland Browns. That's a pretty cool connection. The concert schedule is set for the IndyCar season finale at Nashville. Daughtry headlines Sunday pre-race concert. Riley Green to play Sunday post-race concert. Diplo will be the Grand Marshal.
He's like a big deal.
Yeah, a very big deal.
So that
in terms of DJs.
Yeah, that's a big... Has he ever done the Snake Pit? I want to say
I think he did a couple years ago. But that's a massive deal.
That's a dude with like millions of social media followers.
Yes, very much so. Mark Miles was set to meet with team owners in Monterey about charters. We haven't had any follow-up, though, on that.
Well, it sounded like originally they were going to want to announce it in May. There were some things they needed to work out. A new proposal supposedly went down at Laguna Seca. Haven't heard anything about outside of that proposal. Also, something that I read yesterday, I think it was in Forbes, it was a significant talk about the schedule next year. And I think it was a story by Bruce Martin.
Yes.
Sat down with Mark Miles. interesting thing about that is, and we've even mentioned it about, going into the NFL season with Fox, maybe having the season finale race in a week 2 or something of the NFL season or something like that. Mark Miles said, no, we want to be done the week before the NFL starts. So you're looking at Labor Day weekend for the foreseeable future as the final race of the season for IndyCar. So that kind of dispelled the any thoughts in the next couple years with IndyCar maybe trying to bleed over into the NFL season. Mark Miles said, no, we want to be done and out the way by the time the NFL starts, which hasn't been the case in recent years, right? They've gone into September.
They've gone to mid-September. And look, that's just the reality of when you go to a network that has the NFL not in prime time, but in the 2 afternoon slots.
Right.
There's no space.
Yeah, unless you're doing a Saturday night, but Fox, do they have a prime time?
They wouldn't have college football.
Because they do prime time on Friday nights. Do they not have Saturday
not on
night?
Saturday night.
I can't remember from year to year what the heck
that's Friday night for college football. But then, I mean, to me, the best case scenario, you have a race that starts at 8 Eastern. Problem is, on a Sunday night, I mean, that's hard
tough.
That's terrible for a promoter.
Yeah,
so
unless you're racing out west, but even then it's tough. So that kind of dispelled any thoughts of maybe that happening with Mark Miles going, no, with Fox, we're going to be done Labor Day weekend.
A few other quick notes. Congrats to Chloe Chambers, friend of the podcast. We interviewed her a couple months ago, but she won her first F1 Academy race for Haas over the weekend in Barcelona. Also, we got this tip, Jordan Bianchi on the Teardown podcast in terms of NASCAR. So Gateway moved up to June 15th next year, and that's because Gateway for NASCAR is going to be in the playoffs. Darlington, Loudon, and Gateway will move into the playoffs. Atlanta, Homestead, and Watkins Glen out. So that would explain why IndyCar moved up to mid-June, and because the Cup date currently is early June.
Man, Gateway moving up, getting a Cup race, and within a couple years getting a playoff.
Yeah,
race.
Big deal.
Pretty impressive. Also, Chloe Chambers, congratulations to her with the win, as you mentioned.
Yes.
She's third in the standings.
Wow.
In F1 Academy. They're next in action in late August at Zandvoort. So she has a couple months
It's a long layoff.
Yeah, she's got a 2-month layoff. Maybe she'll come home. Maybe we'll see her at maybe an IndyCar race or something. Who knows?
Congrats to Tony Stewart and Leah Pritchett announcing they are having a baby boy due this November. So congrats to them.
You have a kid and you just get rid of
your Cup team.
Sell your Cup team. But that's a good switch. You don't have to worry about the day-to-day. Now you got to worry about the day-to-day of raising it human.
And did you see the John Force crash?
Yes.
Graham Rahal's father-in-law. Last check, and I haven't seen an update recently, but he was still in the ICU at a Virginia hospital after that crash. I
think he's been stabilized. And like no major injuries, I guess. But from what I saw, I mean, the explosion was one thing, but just the impact with the wall was massive. So good to see that, at least for reports, that he isn't any seriously injured. But that was pretty crazy.
And an update on Wolfgang Monsieur, who suffered a stroke. His sister saying, realistic to say that he will/can be back at the IndyCar event at Gateway.
Nice. That'd be awesome to see.
So that would be back. Excellent news as well. Tweets of the week time. We have, first off, both of these from Tony DeZeno. Yeah, good stuff. So heck of a graphic, heck of a list. And they put together this on NBC over the weekend. 3 different teams and first 3 career starts. Stephen Wilson, Connor Daly, Alex Lloyd, Roberto Gonzalez, Zach Veach, Mario Andretti, and of course Nolan Siegel joining that list. This is a wild list.
Yeah, it is.
And then you have this from Tony DeZeno. A Ganassi Honda Alex passes a Herta for the lead at the corkscrew. Time is a flat circle.
Very nice.
All right, time for our Raynham, the split era driver of the week.
Well, we make a lot of talk about the Miles Rowe and his quest to get to IndyCar.
Well, and could he be an F1 entry next year?
Maybe. And we talked about this kind of going backwards. The best possible thing for Indy Lights next year would be Miles Rowe and Jamie Chadwick battling for the championship.
Yes.
In Indy Lights.
I don't think they're ready for IndyCar just
correct.
yet.
I could see maybe one of them getting a spot start here or there next year. Could one of them get a 500 ride? Who knows? I would say maybe they're not quite ready for that, but that would be the best possible thing. I mean, Sky Sports F1 I think it was Friday of their Spanish Grand Prix coverage had Jamie Chadwick on live from Laguna Seca talking about her win. Of course, being a multi-time Formula W winner, she has that
and
top.
a Brit.
Yeah, and a Brit to boot. Yeah, so that was cool. And that kind of maybe shows what potentially could be with Jamie Chadwick. And same thing Miles Rowe. But before Miles Rowe, there was George Mack, former IRL driver, and raced the entirety of the season in 2002 with 310 Racing. He was the second African-American after Willie T. Ribbs to drive in the Indianapolis 500. He finished 17th at the 500 that year. He finished 16th in points in 2002. And 310 Racing then folded after 2002, and then he went into NASCAR, particularly Truck Series, in their Drive for Diversity program way back in 2006. Here's an interesting tidbit. George Mack appeared in an episode of the reality TV show Blind Date.
I was just reading that.
Where he dated a girl who referred to herself as Q, a reference to the James Bond character. I remember the show. I don't remember him being on. Not that I watched it very often anyway. But when we talk about the opportunities for drivers, whether they're female, whether they're drivers of color, and we talk about Miles Rowe, George Mack, Willie T. Ribbs, everybody knows Willie T. Ribbs. George Mack was after him and had an entire season racing in 2002 in the IRL in what was it an all oval still in 2002?
Yes.
All oval schedule. So his top finish, as we mentioned, 13th a couple times. Had that at Homestead, had that at Pikes Peak Raceway as well, 14th at Chicagoland. But
again, there are a lot of cars then. We're talking, 27, 28.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of like how IndyCar is now. So middle of the pack is pretty good. And from what I remember reading, and I want to say Marshall Pruitt had something on this one time in a mailbag, but it's a very shoestring operation. Like, wasn't he essentially, he owned like an auto shop?
George Mack?
Yeah, I believe. And I mean, this was a shoestring operation, and for him to have the success.
Well, when you look at the 310 Racing, yeah, so we're looking at 310 Motoring was an automotive customization garage in L.A. 310 Motoring or 310 Racing came from the area code of LA, and it turned into, or developed into, a team. It was the first minority owned IndyCar team, and it was just one and done, at least in IndyCar. The company ceased operations sometime prior to 2008. It actually grew and had shops across the United States, 45 in California, and was sponsored by the rapper The Game back in the day, but now it's closed. But that was an effort out of L.A., minority owned, started with customization shops in California, spread across the country, got into racing, didn't last. You wonder or hope that maybe better opportunities in 2024 for a minority-owned team like that. But George Mack was a big part of it in 2002. Unfortunately, it was one and done for him. 15 career starts and finished 16th in points that year. George Mack, this week's Random Split Era Driver of the Week.
And some interesting news about him. So he appeared in a Long Beach Post article last September. So he is now Baron Bay. That's what he goes by. He doesn't go by George Mack anymore, and he's transitioned from racing to entrepreneurship. He had founded Coast Auto Care and Tires, but now he's working as a beauty supply store owner.
Really?
Long Beach Hair Gallery.
Huh. Wow.
So there you go.
How about that? Impressive.
Yeah. So that does it for us. Next week, we'll be back with our IndyCar mid-season grades for all the teams, and of course the latest and greatest in IndyCar news. For Justin Kinney, I am Caleb Hatch. This has been New Track Record Podcast.